All right, yeah, we're at 12:03, so we'll let folks join as they can. Good afternoon. I'm Jim Tassi, the Assistant Director of the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, and at my side is Gene Sedaris, the Executive Director of the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, and we are going to kind of co-conduct this legislative update webinar where I'm going to cover the policy actions that we've been doing, and then Gene will talk a little bit more about how you can specifically get involved. So at this time, I'm going to share my screen. And slideshow. And so please nod your head affirmatively if you see a slide that says BCM goes to Augusta.
Sure.
Yes, not there yet. It's paused. What's going on here? I see. Hold on a second. Why is that paused? That one. There we go. I hit the wrong window. Okay, so are we good? Everyone can see that? Great, thank you. Well, so this says what it's about. We're going to just talk about the bills that BCM has been working on in Augusta. I'll run you through our agenda. We'll talk very, very briefly about the legislative process and about, where the bills that we're tracking are in that process. We'll talk briefly about the kinds of bills that the BCM pays attention to. And then we're going to just talk about bills that we've been prioritizing that are still in committee and are therefore a little bit more time sensitive and have some opportunities that you guys can get involved with to make your perspective known on. And then there are a couple of bills that we'll talk about that are out of committee that are waiting for next steps. And there are some opportunities for you all to do something with those too. And so we'll let you know. Other bills BCM is waiting for, I actually just deleted that slide because the bill I was waiting for actually is out, so ignore that one. We'll talk a little bit about railroad corridor legislation. There's a bunch of bills that are talking about trails versus rails in railroad corridors. We'll talk very briefly about current wins and losses on priority bills, and as I said, we'll talk about how to get involved. I will say that, in general, BCM's role up in the State House has been very much like as a watchdog. We've been looking at everything that comes out, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. So just to kind of reacquaint you with the process that legislation goes through in Maine, someone comes up with an idea. They contact a legislator and develop some bill language. That bill title, at least, is submitted usually in the December prior to the session that we're currently in. So all the bills that we're looking at now were submitted. I think it was December 29th or something like that. First, they come out as a legislative reference, an NLR document. And so sometimes if you hear people talking about an LR, that's just a piece of legislation that has not made the move to being published, at which point it becomes a legislative document. And so you'll hear us talking a lot about LDs today. Once the bill is published as an LD, it gets read in the Senate or the House, depending on which chamber the sponsor is in. It is then referred to committee. Once it's referred to committee, it's scheduled for a public hearing, and that's the opportunity to provide testimony. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. After it's gone through its public hearing, it is then scheduled for a work session. And the work session is when really the decision about the bill's movement is made, and the basic reports that come out of the committee are either this ought to pass, which is a recommendation to the general legislature that this bill is good, it ought to pass, and a unanimous committee report ought to pass usually carries a lot of weight with the general legislature. There is also an ought to pass with amendments option, which is exactly what it sounds like. It can be a recommendation that the bill moves forward, but there might be some changes that the committee recommended be adopted, and that's usually in the not always in the language that is considered on the floor. The report will never be neither for nor against, but that is a kind of a testimony statement. So people who are submitting testimony can either make a recommendation, it ought to pass with amendments, or I'm neither for nor against, which is kind of a wish, it's not wishy-washy as much as it is, sort of uncommitted, and you may have some concerns you want to raise, but you're fairly indifferent as to whether it moves forward or not. You see benefits and problems. And then there's the flat out ought not to pass. And so the committee will either issue ought to pass amended, or ought not to pass. As a testifier, you can use any of these categories to kind of characterize your testimony. This is as far as we've gotten. We've got one bill that is on our priority list that has made it through the work session with the unanimous ought to pass recommendation, and that's LD 216, which is a fairly, it's a minor bill that would exempt hiking trails from stormwater permitting regulations, and the Department of Environmental Protection absolutely supports it, and so we expect that one to sail through without too much difficulty. After the committee has done its report, then the bill gets read in the original chamber that it started in. There could be additional floor debate. There could be additional amendments. There could be just, that's where a lot of additional work can happen. But, in many cases, if the legislature, the chamber will go with the recommendation of the committee, which is why the committee work is so important. There'll be a second reading, more debate, at which point it goes to a vote. At that point, the bill is sent to the other chamber to go through essentially the exact same process to be read, to be discussed, to be voted on. At that point, they're reconciled, and once they come up with a common form that the bill is the same passed in each house, it goes to appropriations if necessary. So the Office of Fiscal Authority assesses bills for whether or not there is a financial impact, and those are called fiscal notes. And if it's got a fiscal note and needs money attached to it, it goes to the Appropriations Committee, which is where many bills wind up dying for want of money. But not all bills have fiscal notes and require appropriations. But if it gets through that process, it gets a final vote in both chambers to enact, at which point the legislature is done with it and it goes on to the governor. The governor can either sign the bill, at which point it becomes law. She can choose not to sign the bill, at which point it becomes law in 10 days, or she can veto the bill. And just as a reminder about the schedule for the legislature, this year, the legislature hopes to wrap up its first session on June 29th. We expect a lot of bills are going to get carried over to the next session because we're approaching 2,000 bills, and they're not all going to get done by now and the end of June. So with respect to what BCM does, we read every single LD title. As of the last time I checked, I had read through 1,780 titles. Out of that group, we're actively tracking about 50 bills. This has been, I think, a fairly unique session in the amount of legislation that's come out that's dedicated to transportation-related issues. And so the BCM has been sort of functioning as almost a watchdog up in Augusta this year, where we're really paying attention to any bill that would have any impact on roadway safety, and in particular, vulnerable user safety, access, and convenience. So we're looking for any bill that deals with transportation funding, safety issues. We've had to play some defense. I mean, one notable bill that, right on the edge of should we comment on it or not, there was a bill that would have relaxed the the kind of thresholds to be considered driving under the influence, and not specifically a bike ped bill, but something that we felt would absolutely make the road safer if we permitted people who were blowing a 0.09 rather than a 0.08 to that being the difference before they could be charged. It was easy enough to put in a comment saying we think that's a bad idea. And we've been doing a fair amount of that. We've been just sort of watching for policy that we think would harm all roadway users, but our constituency in particular, people walking, biking, and rolling. Anything we see that might have a particular adverse impact on them, we have been weighing in on. We've also made some comments on bills that intersect or touch with our mission regarding, environmental policy, climate, health issues, transportation equity. In some cases, our partners reach out to us and say, can you find a way to, attach this to your mission and see the connection and offer comments? And we will do that, but we always try to tie it back to our fundamental mission of making Maine better for walking and bicycling. But as I often say, the bike ped world exists at the intersection of a lot of cultural and social discourses. It's a social justice issue. It's a transportation issue. It's an environmental issue. It is an equity issue. It's an economic development issue. It's a aging adult issue. So we wind up touching a lot of social discourses, and when it seems appropriate, we do comment. The bills that we consider priorities, begin with kind of the bills that we had a hand in writing or initiating. But sometimes a bill, that we didn't even know about pops up, and whether it's a bill that we think is a good idea, that someone came up with, or whether it's a bill that we think is a really bad idea that really we need to weigh in on. Either of those scenarios can bump a bill up to a priority for us, and then we'll work on the appropriate actions to either move it along or stop it. And as I said, we're currently tracking 50 LDs, and we've submitted testimony on I think we're up to 40-ish, and there's a bunch more coming. So it's been a very, very busy year. And we're just now at the point where, as we're getting towards the last, 20% or 15% of bills to still be published, we're hoping that we're at the point where we can begin to shift from sort of a general watchdog mode to a more specific, these are the bills that we really want to get across the finish line mode. And that's what we're talking about today, because hopefully you can help us move some of these bills across the finish line. So I'm going to begin with the bills that are still in committee, and I begin with them because they're the ones that are most actively in process and have the most opportunity for public involvement. The first of these, and arguably, it's in bright green because it is one of our highest priority bills, is LD 730, which is an act to provide traffic safety education in schools. This is a bill that we've tried to pass a couple times previously. This bill has had a public hearing and is waiting for a work session, and I'll tell you about action items in a moment. LD 1156 is a bill that would create a general bond fund issue to fund trail development. This is a bill that really our partners at the Environmental Priorities Coalition put together. We are pro-trail, and so we're happy to support it. And this is one that we think is pretty important, as there are many, many trail projects that are really just waiting for funding to move forward. And some of these include high profile and really significant trails like the Eastern Trail or the Kennebec River Trail, or just, some of these bigger multi-use trails, and certainly some of the rail corridor projects like the Mountain Division Line are in this category that might be benefited from the passage of LD 1156. And then another bill that's still in process, it just got heard yesterday, is LD 1634. Well, I'm going to talk about action steps, so I'll talk more about the bill when we get there. But this bill is primarily focused on giving municipalities more authority or some authority to manage local speed limits. And I'll talk about that more in a moment. But with respect to LD 730, a hugely important bill. This is a bill that would require that every Maine student receive 1 hour of age-appropriate traffic safety education per year between grade 2 and 12. We've tried to do this a couple times. We really feel it's an important bill because, to be a member of a civic society, a civil society, people need to know the rules. People need to know how they're supposed to behave when they're walking, bicycling, or driving on the roads. And there is no consistent, uniform presentation of this content in Maine right now. The Bicycle Coalition of Maine has been running a education program for years in partnership with the Maine DOT, but it's an opt-in program and we don't reach everybody. And we really think that it would be hugely beneficial to have every school kid in the state receiving a common, consistent education about how to safely use the road. So that's why we're pushing this for a third time, and big props and thanks to our friend, Senator Maddie Daughtry, who sponsored this one each time. This is it's a bill that she really believes in. A couple of talking points to kind of you guys can use when common issues come up. This is technically a mandate. However, it is perhaps the easiest mandate in the history of mandates to live with. The content that LD 730 is asking teachers to present is already content that fits within existing mandated guidelines for health education in the Maine learning results. All we're doing is saying, take 1 hour of that content that you have to provide some version of every year and present traffic safety information. And if that weren't, a low enough bar, we also have ready to go content resources that are ready to use in the classroom it'd be very easy to turn into a one class session presentation on and conversation on. We've got resources that work for everyone really from grade 2 all the way up to grade 12. We have a more adult version of our bike ped resources that include information about how to drive near vulnerable users. So, the prep that a teacher would need to do is minimal. We've got the information ready to go. And if the teacher wants to have a free period of some type, she can reach out, or he can reach out to the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, and we can bring one of our instructors in to provide that education. So the key things that you guys want to talk about with this bill are, we need this to make the road safer, so everyone's got the same education about road safety. And it's not a burden on teachers. It's a real easy lift for teachers. And if you talk to people, those are the key things to mention. On LD 1156, this bill is up for hearing tomorrow. And if you've got relationships with the legislators on the committee hearing the bill, you can reach out to them. And this is, the talking points are really pretty self-evident. We need funding for trails. People like trails. There's a lot of support for trails in Maine, but they're underfunded as a public program. So this would provide a public mechanism for funding more trails across the state, motorized and non-motorized. Excuse me. Trails generally are beneficial to quality of life, economic vitality, and health. And we feel that the passage of this bill would help create more trails and multi-use paths that would encourage active transportation to reduce carbon emissions. The BCM testimony, I will confess, says that we think that non-motorized recreational trails should be prioritized because fossil fuel motorized recreational vehicles are carbon emitters too. So to be consistent with climate action plan goals, BCM is saying, we love this bill. We'd like to see non-motorized trails be prioritized. LD 1634 is a bill that would give towns the ability to control speeds on certain local streets. You may not know this, but your town does not have the right to simply change a speed limit. There's a DOT process that has to be gone through at the moment. It involves conducting a study of the average and 85th percentile speeds on the given road. And with that information, the DOT may or may not raise or lower a speed limit. And that process has been very frustrating to municipalities, because there will be a downtown street that, due to, historical legacy reasons, might have a speed limit of 35, but the context has changed and the town would like to reduce that speed to, say, 25. They cannot do that. LD 1634 would give towns very limited authority to change speeds on roads that are posted 35 and under and are in a specific kind of business and residential growth zones. It also gives towns the ability to put in traffic calming elements into the road to kind of reinforce the sign change. And it's very, very limited in scope. It doesn't create huge speed differentials because it talks about a 10-mile-per-hour speed difference at most in contexts that are already pretty low speed. The DOT has charged that changing the signs that put speed limits up doesn't have any effect, but our big city neighbor just to the south, Boston, actually did enact a program where they lowered the speed limits on all downtown streets to 25 miles per hour, studied the effects, and found, considerable impact on driver behavior. So changing the speed limit signs does make a difference. We do support the DOT on the notion of making geometric changes to the road as well. But this is one that it's really the third bill on giving municipalities some authority to change speed limits that that the Transportation Committee has seen. So we know that there's a lot of concern about this issue. I'll talk about one of the other bills in a moment, but you can still submit testimony even though the hearing held. The committee will have the chance to read stuff that's submitted in the next couple of days before the work session. But this would be a good one to reach out and tell them you support, because if you've lived in a town and you tried to contact your police department or your local officials and say, God, can we get the speed limit lowered here, and been told no, the frustration that accompanies having to live with speeding traffic and really having no recourse locally to do anything about it. So we like this bill, and we are pressing to pass this one. The other thing I want to talk about are some priority bills that are through the committee. That means that they have had their public hearing, had a work session, and then had a report issued. And the first bill that went through this is, as I mentioned, LD 216, which was the exemption for hiking trails from stormwater permitting. Excuse me. The other bill that has gone this far in the process is LD 256, which is an act that would add electric bicycles to the electric vehicle rebate program. This bill is, moving forward. It got a divided, what we call a divided report, meaning it went right along party lines. There were 8 people who voted to pass it, and 5 people who voted not to pass it. That means the bill is still alive, but it goes onto the floor for additional conversation. And this is one that we want to hear. We want people to contact the legislature so they hear from them. The talking points on this bill are, basically, whoops, sorry about that. E-bikes really can replace cars for short trips. Was it 75% of the trips in Maine are 5 miles or less, 10 miles or less. And e-bikes are completely perfect for that range. As the owner of a couple of e-bikes, I can tell you, they have not replaced my bicycles. They have replaced my minivan. I use my e-bike a lot to do errands. It really can make a difference, and they're more affordable. So for low income people who are challenged by the burden of owning, paying for and maintaining a car, insuring it, e-bike is a much more cost effective and green choice. This rebate program will be income sensitive, so the rebate will be extended at different levels for people who have demonstrated needs based on their yearly income. Those details are being worked out in an amendment that Michael Stoddard at Efficiency Maine drafted up, and they are acceptable to us. We had a more ambitious program originally sketched out, but this is one of those bills that we want to get through, get the program started, see how it works, and then look to expand it over time. So contacting your legislators and saying, I like e-bikes, and we need to make e-bikes part of the climate solution in Maine is a great thing to talk to your legislator about. They're 100% green. They are emissions free. They are fun. They are really a great tool for getting people out of automobiles and trying active transportation. And they are indeed active transportation. You do need to put some muscular effort into most e-bikes. So you can contact your legislator about that. But the other thing you can do is join us May 4th at the Capitol in Augusta. We're going to be doing a press event up there that's going to talk about our legislative efforts. And we're going to have an e-bike demo on hand for legislators and other participants to take advantage of. If you've never been on an e-bike, come up, try one out, and be prepared to want one afterwards. They are really pretty transformative. They're fun to ride, and you immediately see the practical applications for them. But we want to have a big turnout at this event. We've asked that the bill not be considered on the floor of the Senate until after this event, so that we can get as many legislators as possible on e-bikes, and they can see for themselves that these things are good for the transportation system in Maine. So this bill I wanted to talk about, it goes sort of hand in hand with 1634. It's the other bill that has gone through the process to try and give municipalities control over local speeds. We had a big hand in writing this bill. Big thanks to Representative Dan Ankles for running interference on it, sponsoring it, and pushing it along. This bill has been tabled, which means it's sort of in a state of suspended animation because the sponsor couldn't get to a point where they were in agreement with Maine DOT about what should happen. And so what DOT suggested as a compromise was, let's just kind of put this bill down for a little bit. And the DOT is going to try and experiment with some traffic calming measures in the Brunswick area where Representative Ankles is from. And then they're going to revisit and see whether they were effective and whether other measures need to be taken. We worked with Representative Ankles on this and said, yeah, you should take that, and let's see what DOT comes up with. And, maybe this will have the desired effects, but if it doesn't, we'll have some concrete, things to talk against if we want to try and reinvigorate the effort to pass this. But does a very similar thing to 1634, gives local towns, the ability to control speeds on local streets, 35 and under only, specific context only, traffic calming has to be included. It was really a bill that was written with the concerns of the DOT squarely in mind. They continue to have concerns, and we're hoping that some version of this legislation will move forward, but this one has been put on hold. A few words about railroad bills. There have been a ton of bills commenting on what should happen with railroad corridors in Maine, and there's been a bunch of bills that suggest let's look at feasibility of restoring passenger rail. Let's start passenger rail again. And on some of these bills, they are targeting railroad corridors that have already gone through the legislatively created process of assessing what should happen on these corridors, and are in complete opposition to what the process came out with. So the legislature has developed this mechanism called the Rail Use Advisory Council, which is supposed to bring a bunch of stakeholders together, and they assess what the best and highest use of the corridor is. And there are several, well, there are two, I should say several, there are two corridors that the RUAC, which is the acronym for that Rail Use Advisory Council, that those groups have said, let's put trails down. And that's on the Berlin subdivision, which goes from Portland up towards Auburn, and the Mountain Division line, which at this point goes basically from Westbrook up towards Freiburg. The RUACs met, they chewed things up, they heard hearings, they did a lot of public meetings, and both RUACs decided that the best and highest use of these unused corridors is trail. So LD 209, LD 404, and LD 1450 are all bills that the BCM is supporting because they would basically direct the DOT to start the process of implementing what the Rail Use Advisory Council recommended, which is put in a trail. Despite those recommendations, several bills are seeking to just get in the way of that process. And so LD 860, 861, 1179, 1750, they're all concerned with, oh, let's do another feasibility study, or let's actually start planning to restore rail. BCM opposes all of those. We used to be a little bit more nuanced, and for the record, we love rail. We would love to see a robust train system operating in Maine. It would be amazing if you could throw your bike on the train, go somewhere, and then use your bike for the last mile, or to just have a recreational ride and then take the train home. But the reality is rail has not been proven feasible in Maine in any study done in the last 15 or 20 years. One of the problems apparently is that the population density of Maine is not sufficient to leverage the big federal dollars that would really enable us to kind of get rail up and running again. And so all of these talks about, let's do another feasibility study are really just delaying tactics and obstructionist moves to prevent the conversion of these fallow train corridors into trails. Under Maine law, any conversion of a rail corridor to a trail corridor is interim. And so if at some point the rail seemed feasible to bring back, that trail could be reversed. And BCM would come in supporting that, I would think, because it's an alternative to cars. Rail with trail gets discussed sometimes. None of these bills are really about that, but I'm going to put in a word for that. Rail with trail sounds like the perfect solution, the compromise that gives everyone what they want. Rail with trail increases the cost of either. It's like it makes the project like more expensive by an order of magnitude. It takes like a project that would be $17 million and brings it up to like $60 million. So rail with trail is really just a smokescreen. A support for rail with trail means, again, nothing happens on these corridors. So we're opposing all of this conversation about additional feasibility studies or restoration of service because we see it as just impeding the will of the RUACs and the people in Maine who would like to see these corridors converted over to multi-use trails for recreation, for transportation, for health, for quality of life, for everything. They're great. LD 862, I'll include, this is a bill that would have like taken the railroad lines in the state away from the DOT and given them to a quasi-governmental entity that no one knows exactly what it would look like. We oppose that because we feel like public assets should be managed by a public agency. So this is a vote that we put in to keep the rail corridors in the hands of the Maine DOT, and we'll work with the people that we've been working with on that stuff. So a couple words about wins and losses, because we are keeping score, and this is not a complete list. This is just on the bills that we considered priority. Again, this is, so there was a bill that would have eliminated motor vehicle inspections. And like, why does the BCM care about that? The BCM cares about that because our constituency sometimes is hit by cars that have faulty equipment. We want to make sure that every car in Maine gets routinely inspected to make sure it's safe to be on the road. And, even things like dirty or non-functioning windshield wipers or non-functioning lights can make a huge difference on bicycle and pedestrian safety. So it was easy enough for us to come in not liking that bill. We opposed it. That's what the red means. And that did go the way we wanted. That bill received an ought not to pass and is at the moment dead. LD 1245 was a bill, a version of a bill that seems to come up every session or every other session that would let's register bikes. Let's create another arm of government to make sure that we're managing how bikes are being used. This was targeting e-bikes in particular. And we worked actually with the Bureau of Motor Vehicles and the Secretary of State's office to oppose this. And thankfully that one went down pretty fast. So we're happy with that. There's a number of other bills that we did defensive testimony on and worked to defeat that were defeated. So we were happy. That said, we lost a few. In the last update, I think I talked to you about all of these bills. One was a bill that would have increased the penalties on, driving with an electronic device in your hand. That bill was defeated because the amount that the fines were increased was seen as too burdensome. And so that died in committee. 1076 was one that we fought on pretty hard. This one would have permitted the use of automated speed enforcement just in school and work zones. It was our hope to sidestep, really legitimate concerns about equitable deployment of this technology. And we thought that by, testing it in school and work zones, we were sidestepping some of those issues. Nonetheless, there are logistical concerns and lingering concerns about misuse of data that ultimately killed that bill. The last bill that we lost on that was a priority was one that I worked with Senator Marion Moore from Washington County on, where we would try and improve the shoulders leading up to state parks and other significant destinations. That bill, we tried to roll that into the Maine DOT's process for implementing its recommendations in the active transportation plan. The real benefit of this bill would have been to put a timeline on some of those improvements, which certainly would address these regional destinations in any event. The bill was nonetheless defeated. So I'm going to turn this over to Jean now because she's going to talk about what you can do to get involved. Thanks for listening, and we'll take questions momentarily, but Jean Sedaris.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, if you've got questions, please use the chat feature and we'll cover those in just a second. So there's a lot of different ways you can get involved here. Jim touched on a number of these, but you can testify at a hearing, you can contact your state representative, senator. Writing letters to editor is a really awesome way to do that. And of course, you can spread the word and let other people know. So I'm just going to walk through these a little bit. So as Jim mentioned, there's a number of bills that are either still in committee or going through the process, and some that have moved through that process. So if there is a bill that is still in committee or has not been voted on, you can still submit testimony. So you can find your bill, you can go to our webpage, you can go to the legislature.maine.gov and do a search for the number or the keywords, and you can find your way to a page like this that gives you an overview of what's going on with the bill. So you can read the text, you can read if there's a fiscal note attached to it. It walks through what actions have already been happened in the committee. And then I put the circle there. If there's any scheduled committee meetings, you can see those and be able to attend. Like, for example, the trails bill has a hearing tomorrow that you could attend to watch, or you could still submit testimony for that. So any bill that's still in this committee process, you can submit testimony. Even if a hearing has happened, but a vote hasn't yet, you can submit your testimony. And for the work session, the committee members will review that. So take a look at that if you want to get involved that way. You can also just read what other testimony may have already been submitted. So you can find, this is on our webpage with the legislature, there's a resources section where you can find bills, search for hearings, a little how-to on submitting testimony, or find your senator or your representative. So those resources are always there. If you sort of forget how to get there, please use us as a resource. And of course, contacting your legislators directly is one of the most impactful ways you can get involved. So as a reminder, bills that are still in committee, if you want to check your senators and representatives to see which committees they sit on, because they're the ones that are reading these and are aware of them. If your senator or representative is not on a committee that's reading this or looking at that bill, they wouldn't have heard about it yet or seen it yet, right? That won't happen until there's a full vote. So we recommend at this point, if you're talking about specific bills, to really look for folks that are on that committee. And then when it goes to the full floor vote, all legislators will be reading those and be able to vote on them. But you can go ahead and reach out, contact them directly. The great thing about working in a state like Maine and working at the state level is you have really great access to your elected officials. You can get their contact information and you can reach out, and I find that they're generally very responsive and they want to hear from their constituents. So if they're not on a committee that's hearing one of the bills you care about right now, it's still a great time to connect with them. I would really recommend asking to meet with them so you can share a little bit more, learn about what they're interested in or concerned about, and kind of get on top of what's happening and what might really be impactful to them, or what they're might be concerned about, or get them ready for when some of these bills will be reaching them. So encourage you to always be in touch with your elected officials. Writing letter to editor. This is one that I feel like it's simple and extremely effective way to get your message out. And you might think nobody reads the paper anymore. I can tell you who reads the paper is politicians and elected officials. They read their local papers. They're monitoring, like if their town has a Facebook group, they really use that a way to understand what their community cares about and what issues they care about. It's kind of a way to get a pulse on that. So it gets their attention, it educates the community, and local papers, especially the smaller ones, are always looking for content. And it can also spark a reporter to look into a larger story. If you do this, you might name your representative by name, because I can also almost guarantee you every single elected official has a Google News alert on their name. And if that pops up, they're going to see it. So this is a fun, I think, and pretty a simple way to get involved. Your paper will have information about how to submit one or how long they can be. They're usually a couple hundred words. If you need help with those talking points, we post for a lot of the bills we've weighed in on. Our testimony is posted on our website, so you can always grab that and look for some talking points, or reach out to us if you have any questions. And if you do get one printed, please share it with elected officials. Make sure they see it and they know that you're the one behind it. And also let us know. It's great to know that's happening. And I always like to scan the LTE page to see what's going on in my community too. And the next one is, of course, spread the word. We all care deeply about these issues, and the best way you can get other people is to share your passion, share what you care about, why it matters to you. So forward on emails, on social media posts, or just talk about it with your friends and family is a great way to get folks excited. If you do get a meeting with your local elected official, bring a friend and have them join you too to talk about that, or attend a town hall or other community event. Again, working at state level is great because you generally have really good access to the folks that are voting on your behalf up in Augusta. And Jim already mentioned this, but of course we have our bike day at the Capitol on May 4th. Next week. It's about 11 to 2-ish. You can come and be part of that. Have a chance to get to talk to some elected officials there and just have a fun, and what we've been told will be a lovely, beautiful, sunny, perfect Maine day on May 4th, of course. So I think that's what I have for that. I think we can go to if there's questions in the chat, or if anyone wants to raise their hand. Put that.
Give it that. I did put all of the links that were in the slides that Jean was discussing into the chat. I could not figure out how to use her Windows machine to paste them individually. Sorry. But let us know if you have any questions. You can use your raise hand feature. I'm going to stop the share at this point so we can see your hands up or not. All right, well, it looks like we might have answered all the questions that people may have had.
Yeah, I think if folks don't have questions, we will keep you updated as these things move along as well. So keep an eye on your email when we feel there's a point in the process where your input would be especially valuable. We will let you know. As Jim noted in the process, the session goes through the end of June. There's still a lot of hearings, there's still a lot of work being done, but we would expect some of these bills probably moving to the full chamber and the floor votes in June-ish. So just thinking about timelines and when you might want to get involved. The stuff's going to continue to really move for the next couple of months and then take a break as the summer moves on.
So with that, if there are no questions, we can end a little bit early. Thanks for the applause there, Tony. I'm going to call you in a little bit. And I hope you all have a great day. Thank you for being interested in these issues, and don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions or ideas. I'm Jim@bikemaine.org and Jean is Jean@bikemaine.org. Thank you very much. Have an awesome day.